Hey guys, it's Tyler as always. I'm going to try to combine two ideas in this video, so bear with me if it's a little scattered. Uh, Cosmic K13 in my last video, which is doing super well out of nowhere, thank you guys, that's awesome, uh, commented that I've only played 5e and read Eminem and City of Mist. Could you explain the allure of OSR to someone who's primarily a player? I stick with 5e because of ease of use learning and interesting synergies between classes. If there's a better system that's equally easy to learn, I'm all ears. I think there's a lot of better systems that are just as easy to learn, and I'm not going to dive into OSR because though the first RPG I ever played was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition, which is decidedly OSR, and there are things I do like about it. There's things I don't like about it either, but what I wanted to do is set up a framework for learning new games and running and playing new games. That makes it not difficult to dig into stuff, as well as explaining why you'd want to learn a more complicated game in the first place, be that OSR or anything else. Really short example of that. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which is by all means a crunchy game, has a problem that very rules-light games have. D&D 5th Edition also has this issue. Despite being very crunchy in terms of combat, the skills system is very, very soft, does not have many rules for it. And so it doesn't support many interesting situations from happening. You have to end up sort of scratching your head and really digging deep as a GM to avoid well, I don't know, you're talking to the guy, roll diplomacy. Roll diplomacy again. Well, roll diplomacy again. There's insight of other things, of course. But let's talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition here. We've replaced swimming and climbing and running, although there's the movement speed thing, but let's not get into that, and grappling, all with just athleticism. Well, how many times can you make a character in a game that's just athletic? And that means they're better at the next guy than whatever, right? The guy that's been a trained swimmer his entire life is just as good at grappling. That's really weird, and it doesn't really pass a 2-second examination. This is where crunchy games fix that problem. They don't have to be full simulationist, and I would argue nothing can be full simulationist. It's kind of a rabbit hole that you'll go down and then get disappointed by, and it's a never-ending not a Jacob's ladder. I'm blanking on the name, but you'll keep trying to climb out of that hole and never reach the sun. But the more variety that you have in making characters, the more that character can be believable, in my opinion. And that's sort of the point of role-playing games, right? Is to play a fully fledged, fleshed out character. And when you start to get things that, even with suspension of disbelief, don't pass, very basic, gee, this guy's just good at everything. And so is the next guy. He's also just good at everything. When you lack that variety and that depth that Crunch is supposed to add, Crunch should add depth, not just complexity, there becomes a really big problem in digging into what your character is, who your character is, who another character is, the things that make us different, the specializations that make gameplay more interesting. And you start to run into issues like with Dungeons and Dragons, where the only interesting mechanical choices really happen in combat, just because there's not that much there to do out of combat. So, you picked your complex, crunchy game that you want to play because you appreciate the depth that it adds to characters, to things out of combat, and to things in combat. Right. How do we go about learning all of this without having to stop every 5 minutes to open the book because I don't remember what the rule is on that, or stopping to have to, well, How does that interact with this? I don't know if the designers even thought of that one. Because these are the opposite issues that you run into compared to rules light games, which is, I don't know, there is no rule for that. Let me stop and think and make up a rule on the spot, right? And there's two things that I want you to look at when you're looking at running a new game, as in a new rule set that you haven't read before. And that's, what's the core mechanic? One of the reasons I'm not the biggest fan of OSR is that the core mechanic is often not unified. It's split, right? You have D20 for attack rolls and such, and then percentile for saves and skill rolls, and then another die type for this thing. And it is just well, you just have to memorize it, right? But let's say that we're wanting to make a fairly easy jump from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to 3.5 edition Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. Well, look at the first thing. Use D20 for everything. Pretty much. D20 is the core mechanic. Why are you rolling the D20? What determines your success? Step number 2. Success is either meeting or beating a DC, a difficulty class, which is just a number that either a monster has on a stat block, such as armor class, or an opposed roll, so that monster or NPC will roll a skill die. Say, two characters are trying to swim to catch up to each other. Well, then roll on the swim check. You're trying to meet or exceed that number. In all other cases, the GM is being the adjudicator and making up the number on the fly there. Note on that in a bit. Now that you've got your core mechanic, your core dice rolling mechanic that you're using for everything, and the challenge, you don't need anything else. The rest of it is all up to the players to know what's on their character sheet. They don't need to know every rule in the game. They need to know that I roll a d20, so I'm not fiddling around going, oh, what do I roll for that? Which one's the d20? No, it's the one you roll almost all the time, so don't, fumble around for it like I see some people doing with games that they played for a very long time, right? You roll a d20, and GM, you'll tell them to roll something different when they need to. Or it'll say right there on the character sheet, yeah, you roll a d8, because that's what your longsword does. You roll a d8. And then occasionally you'll pick up a different weapon or be disarmed and have to punch somebody, and you'll need to know something like roll a d4. But what if you don't know that unarmed deals a d4? In fact, it does a d3. Little trick there. Does it really matter that you rolled a d4 instead of a d3? No, not really. I mean, on one hand, you could say, oh, it's a 33%, increase in the range from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4 or something like that. On the other hand, it's a difference of 1. What does 1 health matter in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons? Not much in most cases. Oh, but what if it's the difference between life and death in this situation? And guys, let go of the what ifs, right? We could talk about that after the fact, and maybe if it did end up in the death of a character because of 1 hit point difference, we can just have a moment where after the game we go, ooh, okay, instead of him being dead, he's just severely wounded and he could come back later. Is that going to happen so often that it becomes cheesy and unbelievable? Dying by 1 damage? Probably not. You're usually dying by a lot more than 1 damage. I've played these games for a really long time, so I'm telling you, it's just not going to happen that often. It really won't matter if you just say, well, your fist should do less damage than a sword does. And if you're thinking about it, if they're using a dagger in the moment and that's doing a d4, oh yeah, your fist should definitely do less damage than that. Let's have them do a d2 or something, right? It doesn't matter in the moment as long as you're just using logic, right? Look at the rules for improvised weapons in these games. They're going to tell you, well, treat it like the closest thing that it looks to. You break the chair leg off. That's pretty close to a club. It should probably do like a D4 or a D6, something similar to that. You pick up a branch off of a tree. Well, it's pretty similar to a quarterstaff. It should do like a D6, like a quarterstaff would, right? So just use comparative things and think about what that object is representing, what the dice are representing when they represent that object, right? And you'll have disagreements with the different players about, how much damage a sword should do to somebody, how much damage a staff should do to somebody, and have those disagreements after the game, and then codify it and remember it. And when you talk with your players after the game about a rule that you got wrong or a rule that you made up on the fly, you'll remember it easier when either you've made a ruling and looked and gone, actually, we like the ruling you made on the fly better than what the actual rule is. Then you codify that, you write it down in a rules document of, hey, here's our house rules, because everybody uses house rules. It's just something that's going to happen after a long enough time because you're not going to like every single thing that's codified in the system that you're using. So hopefully that's helpful in a nutshell. Just know the core mechanic of the game. Players, just focus on knowing what your character's mechanics are. Know your character sheet. That way you're not constantly having to look at the character sheet, open a rules document, go, wait, how do I cast spells again? Oh, does that, know how to play your character. Don't focus on memorizing every rule in the rule book. Don't try to read the rule book cover to cover because it's just not meant, these books aren't meant to be read like that. They're meant to look at the table of contents, look at, okay, I'm going to play a wizard. I'm going to flip to the page with the wizard on it. This is the stuff I need to know. I'm going to be playing a human, flip to the page with humans. This is the stuff I need to know. I don't really need to know the grappling flowchart subsystem if my character never plans on getting into a grapple. And if somebody grapples you and suddenly you do need to know this, well, then now it becomes on the GM. Hey, GM, just tell them what to roll. GM, you also didn't memorize the grappling mechanics and this has snuck up on you all of a sudden? No worries. You need to roll a d20. Should probably be like strength. Oh, on the sheet right here, it tells me there's a combat maneuver bonus, combat maneuver defense. All right, we probably roll against that. But again, would it be the end of the world if you rolled against AC because, well, that's what attacks roll against? No, it probably wouldn't. So think about why you're using that crunchier system. What depth do you like that it's adding to your game? Focus on memorizing those rules. The rest of the stuff, you can use context to make up something that's plenty fine. And don't bring it all up during the game because you'll just end up bogging down the game. So you get all the depth of the crunchier system without the clunkiness that's bogging it down because you're not stopping to look up rules every 2 seconds. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching, guys.